Well, we had I think, a good meeting. Given we have got a session starting in a couple of weeks, I would say that it was a positive, a productive meeting in the sense that we discussed a lot of issues. Obviously, we didn't solve anything, but I think that the tone and the tenor is probably what you want, but probably what we want relative to how we move forward in this session. So as we go forward, I think today is, and if it can be symbolic of the rest of the session, we will move through this thing in a positive and productive way. The issues are certainly issues which are difficult to deal with. We've got obviously the budget issue, which needs to be dealt with structurally and deeply, in the sense that we are facing economic times in our state right now that are unprecedented in terms of our history, but I think what I noticed today, at least amongst the leaders, was a willingness to really look constructively at how we can deal with that and how we can come out of this budget crisis, and beyond that, in more specific terms in areas like GAMC, the bonding bill, and so on and so forth. So all in all, a good session, good start to 2010. Kurt?
Thanks, Dave. And I agree with what Senator Senjum said as well. I think the last thing that the taxpayers of the state, the people who are out there paying their bills, who are suffering through economic times, is to hear a bunch of politicians fighting. This is a good tone to set. We had a great conversation in there. It was very civil. We had some things we were going to agree on automatically that we think we can get done early. There's going to be some other bigger things that at the end of session that aren't going to be anything new. You've seen this attraction before. I don't think the tax increases, when you look at the billion in budget deficit, 70% of that came from personal income. Minnesota families, Minnesota business owners, Minnesota taxpayers don't have any more money to give in tax increases. So I think that's one of the things that will probably be a sticking point. But from my perspective, and being in some of these in the past, maybe in a different role, this is a very good meeting. And the fact that we're meeting January 8th versus May or April or whenever, I think is a good sign. It's a very good meeting. It was very cordial, and we had a very good conversation. I think it's a great way to start the session, even before the session starts.
Senator, you suggested today on NPR that you thought that maybe these budget negotiations behind the doors are more productive than a public negotiation. Can you elaborate on that? What did you mean by that?
Well, what I'm talking about is a legislative process that obviously in this case will start in February, and we'll work through the committee structures and the committee recommendations, and they will synthesize into a piece of ideas. But at some point within this process, what I mean is I think the leadership needs to take these ideas that have come from the bodies and carry them into a negotiation phase. And within that phase, then we come up with a solution. I have been personally disappointed with the Legislative Committee Fiscal Policy Commission. I think that's the name of it. I think we sat there many days, as well as you did last year, in a very unproductive sort of fashion. So my belief, and a personal belief, is that we as leaders need to take the ideas of the body and at some point in time put them together into a package that is generally agreeable with both caucuses and the governor. And if we can do that, and we did do it in 2007, 2008, we can complete this session.
But don't you think the public has a right to be exposed to some of those negotiations?
Well, and I think the public did in 2007, 2008, generally speaking. We would inform you after every one of our sessions as to what was talked about, where we were going, what we were talking about. I think generally speaking, even documents were available. So I think that's the way this thing can work. I can't explain to you fully enough how I believe, frankly, the session last year come to the conclusion it did based on the inability for the Legislative Fiscal Policy Commission to work.
Representative Zeller, the Democratic leaders say that if you think you can do this all through cuts, show them, put it on the table and vote for it. And they want that, assuming they want the government to do that within the next few weeks. Is that possible, or are you going to do that?
Well, I think that through the legislative process, I mean, that's what the budget process is all about. That's what a supplemental budget's all about. We've been offering solutions. Those of you that this House is a little bit more raucous than the Senate. We offered amendments. I don't know how many times to how many different bills. If you didn't like the amendments then, don't come back and say this time, well, we want your solutions. I'd say that some of the members of even my own caucus said we offered lots and lots of solutions.
Would you have $1 million in cuts you can put on the table?
No, absolutely. We're going to be a part of the process. We will offer up solutions. We will offer amendments. We will offer. I think Representative Dean had a solution on the GAMC last year that was an amendment to Representative Huntley's bill that then actually got pulled back off the table. The bill was literally sitting there, I think, the last day or two of the session. There's a solution that had a waiver, federal waiver, that covered 80 to 90% of the folks in that program. That bill got pulled back. So we'll keep offering those solutions in the House especially. Oh, yes. Absolutely, I do. Yes.
They ask that you offer votes as well as solutions and amendments. We'll put up votes for those budget cutting bills.
Based on the number of candidates there are for governor right now, I can guarantee one vote, and that's mine. I don't think that any legislative leader can come out and demand that 3/4 of their caucus vote for or against anything. So we're going to offer, we'll offer solutions just like we've been doing the last 3 years on this. Whether they're accepted or not, that's up to the majority. It's up to the body. We had a lot of bipartisan votes. The House tax bill was a bipartisan vote against the tax increases, but I think we'll keep offering solutions. We always have, we always will. That's what the House is about. We have lots of great ideas. We'll keep offering them.
Do you both support quick action on the bonding bill and the governor indicating what the sidewalk is?
Well, I think quick action or going through the process quickly is good. I think right now we have a budgetary problem of about $1.2 billion that we got to assess. I think we need to see what the next budget cycle is going to look like in February forecast. If it's going to be 1.2 or, God willing, it's $700 or $800 million. It's maybe a little bit less. I don't think we should go out and spend a whole bunch of money on bonding before we know what the situation we're in. So I don't know if the first week of session is a good idea, but I think we should at least see that February forecast.
They're suggesting the first 2 weeks they may try and take action on the bonding bill. So you don't support that?
Well, again, I think starting the process and having the process go, but I don't think we can spend until we know exactly what our budget deficit, that whether it's 1.2 or if it's 7 or 800 million. I think we need to be, at least responsible with that. We can actually see through the receipts and through the revenues that are coming into the state kind of where we're at, so we can start the process. Passed and off the governor's desk, I don't know. I mean, I'm one leader in one caucus. I don't know if we can get all 201 of us through a bonding bill and onto the governor's desk by the second week in February. But with each new year, optimism is fresh, renewed every year, so maybe we can, but I'd be surprised. I don't say.
Well, no, I would just say, it may not be so important where you start, it's where you finish, and it's obvious the DFL caucuses are going to bring forth a bonding bill very early, and that's fine. We can certainly deal with it early, and the governor will deal with it, and maybe perhaps pare it down a little bit. I don't know, but in the end, the bonding bill is typically the closure, and we'll probably do the closure after we've done the budget and everything else essential to do during this legislative session. So the bonding bill probably will be first, but I suspect it will be the last to be enacted.
Leaders, this is your first opportunity in your new role to meet collectively on budget issues. What dynamic, you said it was one of cooperation and sort of bipartisanship. Is it different from what you've experienced in the past?
Sure, and I'd like to take full credit for that. No, in all seriousness, though, I've been a part of some of the budget negotiations when we were in the majority and the minority as one of the assistant majority leaders. But I will say this is probably one of the best meetings I've been in, and I've been in several of these in the past, filling in for Representative Seifert or Representative Paulson when we were in the majority. And I think it was a great tone. It was a great way to start off and coming in early, not having it have to be a 4-hour meeting that you hammered it all out there. Start in little pieces like this, and I think it's a great way to start session.
Is that what you attributed to, or is it the budget situation being as dire as it is?
No, I would say that, again, recognizing where the Minnesota voters and Minnesota taxpayers are, the mood of the taxpayer right now isn't to go down to session, go down to the Capitol and fight for a long time. It's go in there, get your work done, and get out early. And April 15th would be a great symbolic date for me. But again, I'm an optimist. I'm not sure that we'll be able to get out of here before May 1st, but I think it'd be a great sign if we could.
Do you think there's going to be consensus on GAM?
I'm not sure. I'm not one of the healthcare gurus, but I think that making sure that the population that is served by GAMC or was served, because that program has been eliminated under the governor's veto, making sure that that population is served or has the coverage that they need, I think there's consensus around that. Whether it's combining two government-run healthcare programs into one and making adjustments to that second one, or whether it's finding a different way for GAMC to work. But the way GAMC was going was unsustainable. 30+% increases every single year. It would have consumed the entire budget within a decade. So I don't think that the current form it was in was workable, but I think there is a consensus around making sure that the people that are in that service make sure they get the care they need.
And I would just say that, yes, we're going to fix that. The DFL's brought forth a proposal. Generally speaking, counties don't like it. Larger medical institutions don't like it. The governor's got a proposal relative to using MinCare, and there are people that perhaps don't like that at all either. But nonetheless, I think it will synthesize into something between those two, and then we've got the federal plan to look at as well. How does that shake out as it moves forward out of Washington, and that may play a part of it as well.
Great, thanks, Larry. Have a good weekend.
Hey, good to see you. What are you doing? Huh? Doing my job.
Is everybody done?
Oh, you got Plum here.
Well, I'll try to answer all of the questions you've already asked, so you don't have to ask any more questions. So I'll start from there. Obviously, as you know, the governor has had his differences with the DFL legislative leaders, but today's meeting was about setting aside those differences and trying to find some areas where we can work together. And so there, were a number of topics that y'all have heard about and that have been discussed. But the most important one is the state budget. And the governor wanted to remind legislative leaders that he's not interested in raising taxes. That's not exactly breaking news, but it's worth reiterating. And so as we move forward and we face the budget deficit, we're not going to raise taxes. So we're going to have to find other areas that we can agree on, other areas where we can resolve these issues. And many of you have asked, and Senator Poggemiller was focusing on the need to have a budget proposal from the governor. I'll tell you that Governor Pawlenty will present to the legislature a complete budget proposal that will resolve this $1.2 billion deficit through budget reductions. So plain and simple, we'll do that. And we hope the legislature will vote on it, and we hope they'll pass it. The timing of that, the governor plans to issue those budget recommendations sometime around the start of session, maybe a little bit before, maybe a little bit after the start of session, but around the beginning of the legislative session. I know Senator Poggemiller talked about doing a budget address. We intend to do this the way that it has essentially always been done, which is a budget document that's prepared by Minnesota Management and Budget, and then a news conference by the governor. And in the governor's State of the State address, he will take the opportunity there to more fully describe and talk about his budget proposals, among other things. So that's the trying to answer all of the questions that you've seen here. I think and that's really the focus of the meeting.
An early bonding bill, is that something that the governor would be willing to do?
Well, as you look at the bonding bill, the governor has said that he's going to propose his bonding recommendations, and I'll tell you we'll be making those bonding recommendations next week. The governor is going to propose something in the range of what is in the budget forecast. The 10-year average of big bonding bills is $725 million, so in that neighborhood. The Democrats have said that they're going to pass a bonding bill that's at least $1 billion. I've heard $1.5 billion, potentially heading up to $2 billion. And so the Democrats want to spend a lot more than the governor does. We've got to stay fiscally responsible, especially under these budget circumstances. We've got to be able to afford the bonding bill. And so there's going to be a little bit of a difference there. And so we'll see what they present and recommend after the governor's recommendations are out. The governor is open to signing some bonding projects early in the legislative session, but we need to see how big the bill is, make sure that it's reasonable, and see what's in it. Yeah, that's, always we have intended to offer to the legislature the opportunity to pass in statute the unallotments that the governor made last summer. And that was always our plan, so that they could then put those into place. They're currently in place, with the exception of the temporary restraining order and the $5 million in the special diets project. But yeah, we plan to put that forward. We talked about heading into this meeting, maybe having the legislature ratify the K-12 education deferral. The school organizations, you should know, are largely supportive of that concept. In fact, there was an Association of Metropolitan School Districts meeting this morning that the Speaker and Senator Poggemiller were at, and superintendents expressed to them that they'd prefer to have those K-12 education deferrals in law, in part because in law then there's a payment waterfall. As you might know, in 2003, when there was a K-12 education deferral, the legislature, at the governor's urging, put in a payment mechanism whereby when there's additional future money, that it would go back into the budget reserves, the cash flow, and to move those K-12 deferrals back. We intend to do that, and we'll present that as part of our overall initiatives to the legislature.
No special session?
No, everybody agreed at this point that we'll just start working on things outside of the legislative session. The committee chairs are going to start working on issues. Our administration is going to be involved. They're going to meet again in a couple of weeks here, and we'll just keep moving forward to the session on February 4th.
Brian, any reaction to Judge Guerin's statement today about fast-tracking the appeals process?
Yeah, we appreciate that. From Governor Palenti's perspective, Judge Guerin misapplied and misinterpreted this statute in this unallotment case. If you look at her ruling, she did not parse the language of the statute. She said that essentially she felt the governor did not use unallotment authority improperly, or used it improperly, even though she reiterated again that unallotment is constitutional and it is legal. She felt he didn't use it appropriately in this case. And however, she didn't use any state law to back up the reasoning for that. So we're pleased that Judge Guerin agrees that this should be fast-tracked, that the appellate courts should have an immediate opportunity to make a ruling on this. Our attorney and the Attorney General's office are working on that appeal. It won't be filed today, but it will be filed as soon as possible in the coming weeks.
And will that appeal go direct to the Supreme Court?
Well, the governor has talked about in the course of that, it's likely that what we'll do is we will ask the Minnesota Supreme Court to immediately elevate the case to the Minnesota Supreme Court so they can make the decision. So it's a filing with the Court of Appeals and then a request to the Minnesota Supreme Court to take the case. It's likely that we'll do that, but we're still finalizing the paperwork. That's the same process. If you look back at the health impact fee lawsuit in 2005, you might recall there was a Ramsey County District Court ruling that said that the health impact fee was inappropriate in light of the tobacco settlement. We filed a motion with the Minnesota Court of Appeals and Supreme Court. The Supreme Court took the case, and they ruled, I think, about 6 months after the trial court decision. So, we'd be asking for an expedited ruling in a case like that. Of course, in that case, the district court opinion was overturned by the Minnesota Supreme Court. So that's why there's an appeals process. And likewise, in this case, we would hope that the appeals court, Minnesota Supreme Court, will overturn the ruling here.
Can you say anything about where the governor might be looking for cuts if he's going to present?
Well, as we look at the budget proposals and as we prepare for a supplemental budget recommendation, the governor has said there are a couple of areas that we won't cut. We're not going to cut funding for military and veterans programs, and we're not going to cut core public safety programs. In past years, we have shielded K-12 education from cuts, but the governor has said that depending on the situation, we may have to consider some reductions in K-12 education. So we're still sorting through those, but suffice it to say that with the exception of military and veterans and core public safety programs and possibly K-12 education, essentially the rest of the state budget will be on the table.
What's the status in the state?
We're still mulling that over at this point.
Is it going to be after the budget is presented? Usually before.
You know, I just haven't decided.
Brian, what about the transparency issue? I mean, is the governor going to be attending the LCPFP meetings, or, are these budget negotiations going to continue to happen behind closed doors?
Well, these weren't budget negotiations. This was just an opportunity for the legislative leaders to meet with the governor and get on the same page as we head into the legislative session. The tradition at the state capitol has not been to have governors testifying in front of legislative committees. If a governor did, then presumably every committee would enjoy the opportunity to have the governor sitting there for hours answering questions. And so Commissioner Tom Hansen speaks on behalf of the governor and our administration on budget matters. He has participated thoroughly in those meetings, and we anticipate that that process will likely continue.
Brian, the speaker said that the governor invited them to meet again in 2 weeks. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yep, that's the game plan. All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks.